briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command fell silent when she walked in. Not the respectful kind of silence that greets a decorated officer, but the sharp, loaded quiet that comes before laughter. Lieutenant Commander Vera Kask moved through it like she'd been swimming upstream her entire career. The SEALs lounging against the back wall exchanged glances, and one of them, a barrel-chested operator with a trident pin that caught the overhead lights, let out a low whistle that wasn't quite appreciation. The training officer, a stone-faced 06 named Bridger who'd seen 3 wars and counted patience as a luxury he'd long since abandoned, barely looked up from his tablet. "You're in the wrong building, ma'am," he said flatly. "Aviation is across the compound." Vera didn't flinch. She'd heard variations of this script in 12 different duty stations across 14 years. "I'm exactly where I need to be, sir," she replied, her Estonian accent softened by years of American military cadence but still there, like a thumbprint on glass. "I'm here for the tactical insertion evaluation." That's when the laughter started. Not loud, not cruel exactly, but dismissive in the way that men who have earned the right to be dangerous sometimes treat anyone they assume hasn't. The problem was they didn't know what Vera Kask had earned, and they certainly didn't know why she was there. What they saw was a woman barely 5'6", with sharp cheekbones and calm gray eyes that revealed nothing, standing in a room designed for people who kicked down doors and extracted hostages under fire. What they didn't see was the Navy Cross citation buried in her service jacket, the one that mentioned Helmand Province and a downed Osprey, and the kind of flying that makes grown men go quiet when they hear about it later. They didn't see the 17 confirmed danger-close gun runs she'd flown in an A-10 Thunderbolt, while Army Rangers painted targets 300 meters from their own position. They didn't know her call sign was Frost, not because she was cold, but because she flew so low and so steady that insurgents said her shadow came before the sound, like the first freeze of winter, silent, inevitable, lethal. Bridger finally looked up, his expression somewhere between irritation and curiosity. "The tactical insertion evaluation," he repeated slowly like he was explaining physics to a child, "is a free-fall jump from 25,000 feet, full combat load onto a target zone the size of a soccer field. It's how we screen prospects for our aviation transport units." "It's not—" "I know what it is," Vera interrupted, her tone respectful but immovable. "I read the parameters. High altitude, low opening, full oxygen, target acquisition in smoke and crosswind, 60 seconds from canopy deployment to ground contact." She paused, and something flickered in those gray eyes that made Bridger sit up straighter. "Would you mind if I tried?" The room went from amused to genuinely puzzled. A female pilot volunteering for a SEAL evaluation wasn't just unusual. It was unheard of. The barrel-chested SEAL pushed off the wall, arms crossed, grinning now. "You ever jumped before, ma'am?" Vera turned to him, her expression unchanged. "Twice," she said simply. "Once over Kandahar when my aircraft took an RPG through the hydraulics at 4,000 feet. Once over the Baltic Sea during a NATO exercise when my ejection seat malfunctioned and I had to manually bail at 32,000. The grin faded. Bridger set down his tablet. "The record," he said carefully, "is 18 seconds off target center. It's held by a master chief who's been jumping for 22 years. Vera nodded once. "I understand, sir." "It's not about proving anything," Bridger continued, his voice lower now, almost warning her. "This evaluation washes out 70% of volunteers, experienced volunteers, people who live for this." "I'm not here to prove anything," Vera replied. "I'm here because someone told me I couldn't do it." That someone, though she didn't say it, was a 2-star admiral who'd looked at her transfer request to NSW Aviation Support and laughed in her face. The same admiral who'd suggested she was better suited for transport runs and liaison work, that combat aviation was a young man's game, that her best years were behind her. The barrel-chested SEAL, his name tape read Hagen, stepped forward, still skeptical but no longer dismissive. "All due respect, ma'am, this isn't about flight hours or combat drops. This is about falling out of the sky with 80 pounds of gear and putting yourself exactly where you need to be while your body's screaming and your vision's tunneling and every instinct you have says pull the chute now. Vera met his eyes. A flown gun runs at 50 feet off the deck with tracers coming through my canopy and fuel leaking into the cockpit. I've held steady while a forward air controller screamed grid corrections in my ear, and I could see the faces of the men I was about to kill. I know what it means to ignore your instincts. The room had gone completely silent now, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they've misjudged something fundamental. Bridger studied her for a long moment, then tapped his tablet twice. "Gear up," he said. "You've got 30 minutes. We jump at 1400. As Vera turned toward the equipment room, Hagen called after her. "Hey, Frost, that really your call sign?" She paused at the door, glanced back over her shoulder. "It is." "Why, Frost?" She smiled then, just barely, a ghost of expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Because I always come in cold." The SEALs watched her disappear down the corridor, and the laughter didn't return. What they didn't know yet, what nobody in that briefing room could have predicted, was that in 90 minutes, Vera Kask would do something that would force Naval Special Warfare Command to rewrite their training manual, that would turn a routine evaluation into a legend whispered through ready rooms from Coronado to Little Creek, that would prove once and for all that the most dangerous thing in the sky isn't the aircraft. It's the pilot who's been told she doesn't belong there. Outside, the California sun beat down on the drop zone, indifferent and bright. The C-130 Hercules climbed through 12,000 feet, its cargo bay depressurizing with a hiss that Vera felt in her teeth. She sat on the troop bench between two SEALs who'd introduced themselves as Petty Officers Carrick and Joe, both Jumpmaster qualified, both watching her with the careful attention people reserve for unexploded ordnance. The gear weighed exactly 83 pounds. Full tactical rig, oxygen system, altimeter, reserve chute, weapons simulator. It pressed down on her shoulders and hips like the hand of gravity itself, reminding her that human beings were never meant to do this. The pilot's voice crackled through the internal comms, his tone professionally bored. "Jumpers, we're passing through flight level 200, approaching drop altitude. Winds at surface are 8 knots from the northwest. It's a beautiful day to fall out of a perfectly good airplane." Joe leaned closer to Vera, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask they'd all donned at 15,000. "You good, ma'am?" Vera gave him a thumbs up. What she didn't tell him was that her heart rate, according to the biometric monitor strapped to her wrist, was 62 beats per minute. Resting. Calm. The same as when she flew. The same as when she'd put a 30mm cannon round through a technical truck's engine block at 1,000 meters while the gunner was actively firing at friendlies. Fear was a resource. You spent it when you had to, not before. Bridger's voice cut through the comm system, sharp and authoritative. "Listen up. When that ramp drops, you've got one job: get to the target zone. I don't care how pretty your form is. I don't care if you do backflips on the way down. What I care about is whether you can put yourself where your team needs you when they need you there without hesitation and without excuses. That's the whole game. That's all it's ever been." The ramp began to lower, and the roar of wind at 25,000 feet swallowed every other sound. Cold air screamed into the cargo bay, so frigid it burned Vera's exposed skin around her goggles. Through the widening gap of the ramp, she could see the California coast far below, a watercolor wash of brown land and blue ocean, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human ambition. Hagen was jumpmaster for this run. He stood at the edge of the ramp, one hand on the static line, built like a monument to stubbornness and repetition. His voice came through clear and calm. 30 seconds. Vera stood, checking her gear one last time with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent 14 years learning that details kept you alive. Helmet secure, oxygen flowing, altimeter on her wrist reading 25,300 feet, main chute properly seated, reserve accessible, weapons simulator locked against her thigh, everything exactly where it needed to be. She moved to the ramp. Joe and Carrick flanked her, not because they doubted her ability to exit cleanly, but because that's what professionals did. They prepared for every possibility, especially when the person jumping was untested in this specific evolution. Hagen caught her eye, gave a brief nod. You've got a 60-second window after deployment. Miss it by more than 20 seconds off target, you fail. Land outside the zone, you fail. Lose control in freefall, we abort and you fail. Questions? No, Senior Chief. 10 seconds. Vera stepped to the edge. Below her, 2 miles of empty air separated her from the Earth. The target zone, a bright orange circle of smoke barely visible from this altitude, sat in the center of the drop zone like a bull's, painted by someone who believed in consequences. The wind tore at her gear, trying to peel her away from the aircraft even before she jumped. This was the moment every person who'd ever doubted her had been right to doubt her. The moment that would prove she was reckless, overconfident, chasing validation she'd never earn. Or the moment that would prove what Vera had known since she was 16 years old, standing in the cold rain outside Tallinn, watching fighter jets take off from Emory Air Base and understanding with absolute clarity that the sky was where she belonged, that altitude wasn't escape, it was home. Go. Vera stepped off the ramp and fell into the blue. For 3 seconds, the world was chaos. Wind slammed into her from every direction, spinning her sideways as the C-130's slipstream caught her like a leaf in a hurricane. Gravity asserted itself with gleeful violence, accelerating her toward terminal velocity 120 miles per hour straight down. Her ears popped. Her vision narrowed. Every primitive instinct in her brain screamed that this was dying, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that no amount of skill or training could save her from the fundamental physics of falling. She ignored all of it. Spread eagle position, arms and legs extended to maximize surface area and stabilize. Head up, back arched. She found the horizon, locked onto it. The spin stopped. She was stable. Now came the part that separated people who jumped from people who jumped. Vera tucked her right arm, shifted her weight, and carved a perfect 45-degree angle across the sky. She was navigating now, not just falling. The wind became a tool instead of an obstacle. She could feel it pressing against her body, and she used that pressure the way she'd once used air currents to hold a steady gun run through mountain valleys with precision that looked like instinct, but was actually 10,000 hours of practice compressed into muscle memory. The altimeter on her wrist blurred past 20,000 feet, 18,000, 15,000. Far below, the target zone was visible now, an orange circle that looked impossibly small from this height. She needed to deploy her chute at 5,000 feet. That gave her approximately 45 more seconds of freefall to position herself. Most jumpers would have been pulling corrections constantly, fighting the wind, burning energy and altitude while they wrestled themselves toward the target. Vera did something different. She went perfectly still, not rigid fluid like water finding its level. She let gravity pull her exactly where physics wanted her to go, feeling the crosswind push her slightly northwest. She calculated vectors in her head without thinking about it, the same way she'd once calculated weapon release points and lead angles. 8,000 feet. The target zone was directly below her now, offset maybe 30 meters to the east because of wind drift. Too far. Most jumpers would panic. They'd burn altitude trying to correct, then pull their chute early and pray they could steer into the zone under canopy. Vera tucked both arms and went into a tracking dive. Her body became an airfoil, sleek and fast, trading vertical altitude for horizontal distance. The wind screamed past her helmet. The ground rushed up with horrifying speed. 6,000 feet, 5,500. She was bleeding altitude too fast, but the target zone was sliding back under her, coming into perfect alignment. At exactly 5,000 feet, Vera threw her pilot chute. The main canopy deployed with a brutal crack of fabric catching air, decelerating her from terminal velocity to 20 miles per hour in less than 2 seconds. The harness dug into her shoulders and thighs, and for a moment her vision went spotty from the G-force. But she was under a good chute. Stable. Controllable. And directly above the target zone. She had 60 seconds. The wind at 5,000 feet was different from the wind at 25,000, warmer, more turbulent, swirling in eddies created by the terrain below. Vera ignored it. She pulled her steering toggles, spiraling down in a tight, controlled descent that would have made a civilian skydiving instructor weep with joy. 3,000 feet. The target zone expanded below her, and she could see the ground crew, now tiny figures in BDUs, standing outside the marked circle, watching. 2,000 feet. She was steering directly into a headwind now, bleeding off forward speed. The smoke from the target marker drifted lazily westward, showing her exactly where the wind wanted to push her. 1,000 feet. Vera pulled a hard right toggle, swinging her canopy into the wind, then straightened out. The target zone filled her vision. 500 feet. She could see individual blades of grass now, the scuff marks in the dirt where previous jumpers had landed, the exact center of the target marked by an orange panel. She was coming in slightly hot, but that was fine. That was intentional. At 200 feet, Vera initiated her landing flare, pulling both toggles down smoothly to convert her forward momentum into lift. The canopy pitched back, slowing her descent. At 50 feet, she could see faces in the ground crew. Some of them had their mouths open. At 10 feet, she pulled the toggles to full flare. Her boots touched the earth exactly in the center of the orange panel, so precisely centered that when she took a step forward to collapse her canopy, her boot print covered the white marker that designated dead center. 18 seconds from canopy deployment to ground contact. The ground crew stood frozen, staring. Somewhere behind them, a stopwatch beeped. Then Hagen's voice, rough with something that might have been disbelief, cut through the radio chatter. Target center. Dead fucking center. Time to impact 18 seconds. New course record. Vera gathered her canopy, her face showing nothing. But inside, in the quiet place where she kept the parts of herself that the Navy had never seen and never would, she allowed herself one thought, not about proving anything, not about records or evaluations or admirals who'd laughed. Just this: she had done what she said she would do. The rest was noise. By the time the C-130 circled back to pick them up, every SEAL on the ground crew had found a reason to walk past Vera and nod. Not smiles, not congratulations, just the small acknowledgement that happens between professionals when someone does something that demands respect. Joe helped her collapse and pack her chute, his movements efficient and silent. When they finished, he straightened and extended his fist. Vera bumped it. That tracking dive, he said quietly. At 6,000 feet, most people would have pulled early. Most people don't fly strike aircraft for a living, Vera replied. You get used to being uncomfortable. Carrick wandered over, carrying his own gear. 18 seconds. Master Chief Ramos held that record for 6 years. He's gonna lose his mind. It's not about the record, Vera said, but even as she said it, she knew it was partly about the record. Everything was always partly about proving that the people who said you couldn't were wrong, and the people who believed you could were right, and the vast majority of people who simply didn't care one way or another had missed something important. Bridger approached last, his expression unreadable. He stopped 3 feet away, arms crossed, and studied her the way a mechanic studies an engine that shouldn't run but does. That was either the best jump I've ever seen or the luckiest, he said. Sir, with respect, I don't believe in luck. Neither do I. He was quiet for a moment. The admiral who denied your transfer, Peterson. Vera's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Yes, sir. He's gonna want an explanation for this. I imagine he will, sir. Bridger almost smiled. Almost. I'm writing you up for advanced qualification. You're cleared for tactical insertion support with our strike elements. But understand something. Commander breaking the record means every SEAL in the program is gonna want to know who you are and what you've done. I'm good with that, sir. Are you? Because once they start asking questions, they're gonna find out about Helmand, about the Osprey, about the gun runs you flew that Army Rangers still tell stories about. He paused. They're gonna find out why your call sign is Frost, and once they know that, they're not gonna see you as someone who broke a jump record. They're gonna see you as the pilot who stayed on station for 90 minutes with a fractured fuel line and smoke filling her cockpit because she'd promised close air support and she keeps her promises. Vera said nothing. There was nothing to say. What Bridger was describing had happened, and she'd do it again if the situation demanded it, and talking about it wouldn't change either fact. Load up, Bridger called to the rest of the team. Birds inbound in 5. As they walked toward the pickup zone, Hagen fell in step beside Vera. He didn't say anything for 20 yards, just matched her pace across the dusty field. Then quietly, "There's a reason we tell people they can't do things, you know." "What's that, Senior Chief?" "Because most people can't. And the ones who can," he glanced at her sideways. "The ones who can usually have something to prove, something that makes them push past sense into reckless. And you think I'm reckless? I think you knew exactly how dangerous that tracking dive was. I think you did the math and decided the risk was acceptable, which means you're not reckless. You're just willing to pay costs most people won't." The C-130 was dropping toward the field now, gear down, flaps extended. "Every cost has a limit, ma'am," Hagen continued. "Even for people like you, just make sure you know where yours is before you find out the hard way." He walked ahead before she could respond. Vera watched him go, considering his words. The truth was she did know where her limits were. She'd found them on a smoke-filled afternoon over Helmand Province when her aircraft's fire suppression system failed and she had two choices: eject and leave a Ranger platoon without air support, or stay in a cockpit that might explode at any second and finish the mission. She'd stayed. The aircraft hadn't exploded. The Rangers had walked out alive. And Vera had learned something fundamental about herself, that she was the kind of person who would burn for strangers if it meant keeping a promise. Most people never learned that about themselves. Most people never had to, but she had. And now every decision, every mission, every jump from an aircraft at 25,000 feet was measured against that knowledge. Not reckless, just clear about what mattered. The C-130's engines roared as it settled onto the dirt field and the ramp dropped with a hydraulic whine. The team loaded up and Vera took a seat near the bulkhead, strapping in with automatic precision. As the aircraft climbed back toward altitude, Joe leaned over, shouting to be heard above the engine noise. "You jumping again tomorrow?" Vera looked at him, surprised. "Wasn't planning on it. This was a one-time evaluation." "Yeah, see, the thing is," Joe grinned. "Now that you broke the record, every SEAL in the program is gonna want to beat it, which means there's gonna be jumps every day for the next month, and it's traditional for the record holder to be present. You know, for morale." Carrick laughed, shaking his head. "What he means is nobody wants to get shown up by you a second time unless you're there to watch them try." Despite herself, Vera smiled. "I'll check my schedule." "You do that, ma'am," Joe said, still grinning. "Because Senior Chief Ramos already heard about what happened, and he's requesting jump time for tomorrow morning. Direct quote, I want to meet the pilot who thinks she can outdive a SEAL." The flight back to base took 20 minutes. When they landed, Vera expected to debrief, file paperwork, and return to her regular duties. What she didn't expect was the crowd waiting on the tarmac. Maybe 30 people, instructors, students, support staff, all of them gathered around the drop zone office. At the center of the crowd stood a man in his mid-40s, built like a fire hydrant with a Master Chief's anchors on his collar and a look on his face that suggested he'd woken up that morning expecting a normal day and had been personally offended by reality's refusal to cooperate. "That's Ramos," Hagen muttered as they filed down the ramp. "Be polite, he's a legend around here." "I'm always polite," Vera replied. "Yeah, that's what worries me." They crossed the tarmac and the crowd parted. Ramos stepped forward, his eyes locked on Vera with the intensity of someone conducting a threat assessment. He stopped 3 feet away, looked her up and down, then extended his hand. "Master Chief Elias Ramos, I held the record you just broke." Vera shook his hand. His grip was exactly what she expected, firm without being aggressive, a professional courtesy. "Lieutenant Commander Vera Kask. I know who you are, looked you up while you were in the air." Ramos paused. "Navy Cross, Silver Star. 3 distinguished flying crosses, 97 combat missions in the A-10. You've got more trigger time than most fighter pilots I know." "I just do my job, Master Chief." "Your job," Ramos repeated, his tone dry. "Right, the same job that got you shot down over Helmand and had you calling 9-line medevac requests while you were actively bleeding from shrapnel wounds." Vera said nothing. This was information you could find in her jacket if you had the clearance and the inclination. It wasn't secret. It just wasn't something she led with. "I'm not here to bust your balls, Commander," Ramos continued. "I'm here because I've been jumping for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen every variation of perfect that altitude and wind and human capability could produce. Then you go and pull a tracking dive that should have gotten you killed, thread a needle I didn't think could be threaded, and plant yourself on target center like you'd been doing it your whole life. He paused, studying her. So I've got one question. How? Vera considered the question. She could give him a technical answer talk about angles and air resistance and the math of freefall. But that wasn't really what he was asking. What he was asking was how she developed the judgment to know when to be aggressive and when to be patient, how to read chaos and extract signal from noise. And the answer to that question was 14 years of flying strike aircraft in contested airspace, of making life-and-death decisions at 500 miles per hour with incomplete information and no time for second-guessing. "I fly low and slow, Master Chief," she said finally. A-10s don't have ejection seats that work reliably below 200 feet. Every time you go danger close, you're betting your life that you read the situation correctly. You do that enough times, you get good at knowing which bets are worth making. Ramos absorbed this, nodded slowly. Low and slow. Yeah, I read about your tactics. 75 feet off the deck, flying gun runs through valleys where the Taliban could practically throw rocks at you. 50 feet, actually. 75 is too high. You give them time to track you. Someone in the crowd, a younger SEAL with a fresh trident, laughed nervously like he thought she was joking. She wasn't. "Tomorrow morning," Ramos said. 0700. "I'm jumping and I'm taking back my record. You're welcome to watch." "I'll be there," Vera replied. "But Master Chief, with respect, you're not taking back anything. That record stands." Ramos grinned then, a fierce expression that transformed his face from stern to genuinely amused. "We'll see about that, Commander, we'll see." The crowd dispersed slowly, people drifting back to their duties but casting glances at Vera as they went. She'd crossed some invisible threshold, earned some currency she hadn't known existed. It should have felt good. Mostly it felt complicated, because respect was always conditional, always provisional, always one mistake away from evaporating like morning fog. Bridger appeared at her elbow. "My office, 15 minutes, we need to discuss your assignment." "Yes, sir." She watched him walk away, then turned to find Joe and Carrick still nearby packing gear. "Question for you both," she said. "What happens now?" They exchanged glances. "What do you mean, ma'am?" "I broke the record. I proved I can handle the physical requirements, but I'm here for tactical aviation support, not jumping out of airplanes. So what happens now?" Joe straightened, his expression more serious than she'd seen before. "Now the hard part starts. The jump was impressive, but it was also just a screening. What comes next is integration, learning how we operate, how we think, how we move. Learning to put a helicopter or a gunship exactly where we need it, when we need it, under fire and in the dark." "That's what I do," Vera said quietly. "I know, ma'am, but you do it with an A-10 flying solo, making your own decisions. What we do requires different skills. You'll have multiple teams on the ground, all calling for support. You'll have to prioritize. You'll have to tell people no, even when they're dying and they're begging for help, because you can't be everywhere at once." He paused, his voice dropping. "The question isn't whether you can fly, you can. The question is whether you can live with the choices this job forces you to make. Because some nights you're gonna go home and replay every second of a mission, and you're gonna know exactly which decision got someone killed." Vera looked at him for a long moment. "I already live with that, petty officer. Have been for years." Joe nodded slowly. "Then you'll fit right in." Bridger's office was a study in functional minimalism: metal desk, filing cabinets, a single window that looked out over the training grounds. Awards and qualification plaques covered one wall, each one representing hundreds of hours of training and risk. Bridger sat behind his desk, reading something on his computer screen. He gestured for Vera to sit. "I spoke with Admiral Peterson," he said without preamble. "He's not happy. Claims you bypassed chain of command, showed poor judgment, put yourself at unnecessary risk." "Did he mention that I broke the course record, sir?" "He did. He also said it was luck." Vera's expression didn't change. "What do you think, sir?" Bridger leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I think luck is what people call skill when they don't want to acknowledge it. I also think you knew exactly what you were doing out there, which means you took a calculated risk. The question is why? Why push this hard? Why force the issue?" It was a fair question. Vera took a moment to answer it honestly. Because I've spent 14 years being the best at what I do, and watching men with half my experience get opportunities I'm told I'm not qualified for. Because I'm tired of hearing that combat aviation is a young man's game when I've got more combat time than most of the pilots teaching at Top Gun. Because Admiral Peterson looked me in the eye and told me I should be grateful for transport assignments, like flying medevac choppers and supply runs was the ceiling of my ambition. She paused, her voice quiet but steady. I have nothing against transport. It's essential work. But I didn't spend 14 years becoming a weapons officer so I could ferry supplies. Bridger was silent for a long moment. You understand what you're asking for, right? Integration with NSW means you're signing up for the worst of it. When diplomacy fails, when the politicians run out of words, when the only option left is to send highly trained people into very dark places to do very hard things, that's where you'll be. Not as support, as a primary asset. I understand, sir. Do you? Because the jump was dangerous, but it was controlled danger. Training, exercise, danger. What you're asking for is different. That's people shooting back. That's split-second decisions with incomplete intel. That's losing people you trained with because you were 2 seconds too slow or because the enemy was better that day. He leaned forward. That's going home and lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering if you should have come in from a different angle or held fire 1 more second or told the team leader no when he asked for gun run you knew was 50-50. Vera met his eyes. I've been there, sir. I know that feeling. And I also know the feeling of doing everything right and still losing people. But I also know the feeling of being exactly where I need to be, with exactly the right tools, and saving lives because I'm that good at my job. She paused. I'd rather live with the hard nights knowing I was in the fight than live comfortably knowing I sat it out because someone decided I wasn't the right fit. Bridger studied her for another moment, then nodded once. Okay, you're in, but you're starting from the bottom, Commander. I don't care about your rank or your decorations. In this program, you earn respect through performance. You'll train with our air assets, learn our procedures, fly missions with our teams. And if at any point I think you're not cutting it, you're gone. Clear. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Report to the flight line tomorrow at 0600. You'll be flying with one of our MH-60 crews. Observation only. Don't touch anything, don't question the pilots, just watch and learn. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Vera stood, saluted, and turned to leave. She was halfway to the door when Bridger spoke again. Commander, one more thing. She turned back. That Admiral Peterson, he's going to hear about this. About you breaking the record, about your assignment to this program. And he's going to do everything he can to make your life difficult. Political pressure, administrative obstacles, questions about your fitness for duty. Be ready. I've been ready for that my whole career, sir. I know. That's why you're still here. Outside Bridger's office, the sun was setting over the California coast, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Vera of tracer fire and burning fuel. Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She walked toward her quarters, processing the day. In the span of 6 hours, she'd gone from being dismissed as someone who'd wandered into the wrong building to holding a course record and earning assignment to one of the most elite aviation programs in the military. It should have felt like victory. Mostly it felt like the starting line. Because Bridger was right. The hard part was just beginning. The jump had proven she could perform under pressure in a controlled environment. What came next would prove whether she could perform under pressure when the environment was trying to kill her and the people depending on her. Her phone buzzed, a text message from a number she didn't recognize. Master Chief Ramos, 7 a.m. tomorrow, drop zone, bring coffee. She smiled despite herself. The SEALs had their own culture, their own codes. Earning respect was step one. Maintaining it was everything else. She typed back a response. I'll bring the coffee if you bring the humility. You're gonna need it. 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing. Then, you're all right, Frost, for a pilot. It was maybe the highest compliment she'd received in 14 years of service. That night, lying in her rack staring at the ceiling, Vera thought about the question Joe had asked. Whether she could live with the choices this job demanded. Whether she could function in an environment where every decision carried weight, where being good wasn't enough and being perfect still left room for catastrophe. The truth was she'd been living in that environment since her first combat deployment. The difference now was that people were finally willing to see it. She closed her eyes and let sleep come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove that the sky didn't care about your gender or your accent or whether some admiral thought you belonged. The sky only cared whether you could fly, and Vera Kask could fly. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of California dawn that made you remember why people moved west in the first place. Vera arrived at the drop zone at 6:45, carrying 2 large coffees black for Ramos, because anyone who'd been a Master Chief for that long didn't waste time with cream and sugar, and one for herself. Drop zone was already active. She could see the C-130 on the tarmac, engines warming up, ground crew moving with the efficient choreography of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Ramos stood near the equipment shed, surrounded by a small crowd of SEALs who were clearly there to watch him attempt to reclaim his record. He spotted her approaching and grinned. "You brought coffee. I might have to revise my opinion of pilots." "Don't get too excited, Master Chief. It's just coffee, not a miracle." He laughed, a short, barking sound that seemed surprised to be happening. "Fair enough." He took the cup, sipped it, nodded approval. "Bridger says you're flying with the Night Stalkers today. Observation run with one of our MH-60 crews. That's the plan. Good crew, best helicopter pilots in the world, which is what happens when you spend 20 years doing nothing but flying special operations. They'll teach you things your A-10 never prepared you for. I'm looking forward to it." "You should be." But right now, he gestured toward the aircraft. "You're gonna watch me take back my record. No offense, but 18 seconds was impressive. I'm gonna hit 16. One of the other SEALs, a senior chief whose name tape read Morrison, snorted. "Elder statesman here thinks he's still got it. I give him 30 seconds, tops." "I'll settle for not breaking both legs," another added, grinning. Ramos shot them both a look that could have melted steel. "Just for that, I'm dedicating this jump to everyone who said I was too old, which apparently is all of you." The banter continued as they geared up, the easy ribbing of professionals who trusted each other completely. Vera watched, coffee in hand, feeling like an anthropologist observing a culture she understood intellectually, but hadn't quite internalized emotionally yet. This was different from strike fighter squadrons. Fighter pilots were competitive too, but in a different way. Individual excellence, personal glory, the best stick in the squadron. This felt more collective. They gave Ramos endless grief, but they'd also closed ranks around her yesterday the moment she'd proven herself. Loyalty earned through competence. That was something she understood. The C-130's engines spooled up to full power. Time to go. Ramos drained his coffee, crushed the cup, and tossed it into a trash bin with the casual precision of someone who'd probably done the same thing before 1,000 jumps. "All right, Frost, watch and learn." "Good luck, Master Chief." "Don't need luck, just gravity and stubbornness." He walked toward the aircraft, and the crowd followed. Vera stayed at the edge of the drop zone, positioning herself where she'd have a clear view of the target. The aircraft lifted off, climbing in a steady spiral that would take it to jump altitude. 15 minutes later, it was a small speck against the blue sky, barely visible. Then the speck ejected a smaller speck. Ramos had jumped. Vera raised her binoculars, tracking his descent. She could see him stabilizing quickly, none of the initial spin she'd experienced. He carved across the sky with the confidence of someone who'd done this so many times it was basically muscle memory. Beautiful form. Perfect control, he'd be competitive. At 5,000 feet, his canopy deployed, clean opening, no complications. He began his descent spiral, steering toward the target zone with textbook precision. The wind conditions were nearly identical to yesterday's slight northwest crosswind, maybe 8 knots at surface level. Advantage to Ramos because he'd studied her jump, knew the conditions, could adjust his approach accordingly. 3,000 feet, 2,000, 1,000. He was coming in fast, bleeding altitude in a tight spiral that would give him maximum control during the final approach. 500 feet. Ra could see him clearly now through the binoculars. His body position was perfect, toggles pulled at exactly the right angles. He was threading the needle the same way she had, not through luck but through thousands of hours of practice and an absolute unwillingness to accept anything less than perfect. 200 feet. He initiated his flare. 100 feet, 50 feet. He touched down 4 meters from target center. Clean landing, no stumble. Excellent jump by any measure. The stopwatch beeped. 20 seconds from canopy deployment to ground contact. The crowd erupted in cheers, not because he'd beaten her record, but because at 46 years old, after 23 years of jumping, Master Chief Elias Ramos had just proven he could still compete with anyone. Vera lowered her binoculars, smiling. Ramos had collapsed his canopy and was walking toward her, his expression somewhere between pride and frustrated acceptance. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard but grinning. 20 seconds, 4 meters off center. I'm getting slow in my old age. That was a masterclass, Master Chief. I learned more watching that jump than I did making my own. Yeah, he studied her. What you learn, that experience counts for something. You made it look easy because you've done it so many times you don't have to think. You just execute. That's where I want to be. Ramos nodded slowly, his expression softening. You'll get there. Already halfway there, honestly. The tracking dive you pulled yesterday, I've seen maybe 5 people ever do that successfully. The fact that you're still alive means you've got the judgment to match the skill. He paused. That's the rare part. Skill you can teach. Judgment. That comes from staying alive long enough to learn what kills you. Morrison walked up, slapping Ramos on the shoulder. Not bad for a dinosaur. Dinosaurs ruled the earth for millions of years, Ramos shot back. I'll take the comparison. Speaking of comparisons, Morrison turned to Vera. You jumping again anytime soon, ma'am, because the lieutenant here, he jerked his thumb at a younger SEAL. Thinks he can beat your record. I've got $50, says he can't. Vera glanced at the lieutenant, who looked both eager and terrified, then back at Morrison. I'm not jumping today. I've got a flight. She checked her watch. 40 minutes. But for what it's worth, anyone who thinks breaking records is about raw talent is gonna be disappointed. It's about preparation and experience and knowing exactly how much risk you can tolerate. Hear that? Morrison called to the lieutenant. She's saying you're gonna fail. That's not what I said, but Morrison was already walking away, laughing. The lieutenant approached Vera, his expression earnest. Ma'am, I wasn't trying to disrespect what you did. I want to be that good. How do I get there? Vera considered him. Young, maybe 25, physically capable, clearly driven. Probably thought skill was just a matter of trying hard enough. How many jumps do you have? 87, ma'am. I have 2. You know what the difference is? He shook his head. I spent 14 years making life-or-death decisions at 500 miles per hour with incomplete information and no backup. Every flight was a test. Every mission could end with me dead or captured or worse. That's what prepared me for yesterday's jump, not practice, but stakes. She paused, her tone gentler. You want to be that good, stay in the fight long enough to learn what matters. Experience isn't just repetition. It's surviving the situations that should kill you and extracting lessons from them. The lieutenant absorbed this, nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. Good luck on your jump. Vera left the drop zone and headed for the flight line. The MH-60 Black Hawk was already on the tarmac, rotors slowly turning as the pilots completed their pre-flight checks. The crew chief of staff sergeant, whose name tape read Kowalski, saw her approaching and waved her over. Commander Kask, I'm Kowalski. I'll be your tour guide today. Appreciate it, Sergeant. Not a problem. We're doing a coastal patrol run, checking surveillance points, basic bread and butter stuff. Boring but necessary. You'll ride in back with our tactical team. Don't touch anything, don't interfere with comms, and if someone tells you to brace, you brace immediately. Clear. Clear. Good, let's get you strapped in. The interior of the MH-60 was cramped, functional, every surface covered with equipment and tie-downs and the accumulated wear of hard use. The tactical Team 4 SEALs in full kit nodded as she settled into a jump seat. One of them, a petty officer whose face she recognized from yesterday's crowd, leaned over. You're Frost, right? The pilot who broke the jump record. That's me. Heard you're integrating with our aviation element. How's that going? Just started today, jury's still out, he grinned. You'll be fine. Anyone who can pull that tracking dive has the right mindset. Just remember, rotary wing is different from fixed wing. We don't go fast, we go where fast can't. The pilots' voices crackled through the internal comms, running through final checks. Then the engine spooled up to full power, and the Black Hawk lifted off with the characteristic wobble of helicopters defying gravity through brute force rather than elegance. They climbed to 500 feet and turned north along the coast. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretched away to the horizon, endless and indifferent. Vera watched the crew work. The pilots communicated in shorthand, their movements practiced and precise. The crew chief monitored systems with the calm attention of someone who knew exactly which gauges mattered and which were just providing noise. The tactical team sat ready but relaxed, weapons secured but accessible. This was routine for them. Another day, another flight. Nothing special. But for Vera, it was an education. She'd spent her career flying strike missions direct to target, deliver ordnance, return to base. Linear. Simple in concept even when complex in execution. What she was watching now was different. The MH-60 crew was conducting surveillance, maintaining position, coordinating with ground teams, adjusting altitude and heading based on real-time intelligence updates. They were part of a larger system, responding to inputs that came from sources she couldn't see or hear. One of the pilots, a CW03 whose call sign was steady, rotated in his seat and caught her eye. His voice came through her headset. "Commander, you're qualified on fixed-wing only, correct?" "That's correct. Ever flown a helicopter?" "No, sir." "Want to?" Vera blinked. "I thought this was observation only." "It is, but we're 30 miles from anything important and the weather's perfect. You can observe better from up here." He gestured to the co-pilot's seat. "Come on up." Kowalski helped her unbuckle and move forward. She settled into the co-pilot's seat, immediately overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information demanding her attention. The instrument panel was a chaos of gauges and digital displays. Through the windscreen, the coastline